I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, and this story happened 5 years ago when I was 13. Every year, as tradition, my family and I head across the street to a neighbour's house. We and some of our other relatives and friends meet here to celebrate Christmas. As the night grew further and further on into the early hours of the morning, I became tired and decided best that I go home to sleep. Neither I or my older sister owned a key to unlock our house, so therefore I had to borrow my mother's. "Don't lose it," she said, "it's our only one." "I won't, Mum," I replied, and then said my goodbyes and left for the house. Though my house is only just across the street, Mum insisted that I ring her when I got back. I remember it was a really hot night. It's summer during Christmas in New Zealand, and as I walked across the street, I looked up to see the star-filled sky beaming above. I was in a good mood that night. Everything up until that next hour had gone really well. Little did I know my mood would shortly be shattered. I walked up the steps of our house onto the front porch, unlocked and walked through the door, slipping the key into my back pocket as I walked in. It was dark in our long hallway, and as I quickly made my way down and into my mother's room to make the phone call, I switched the hall light on. The light came as somewhat of a relief to me, as I tend to panic a tad in the dark. I made the phone call to assure Mum I was home and I was safe. She told me she'd be home along with my sister in the next half hour or so. So I decided to stay up and let her in rather than getting up out of bed half asleep to let her in. After our short discussion, I placed the phone down on Mum's Duchess and walked into our living room, switched on the TV and remained there for about 10 minutes. As I sat there watching some late night infomercials, I noticed the light flashing on our living room phone. This happens when either the phone is ringing or when the phone in Mum's room is picked up off the hook. Now I thought, surely that can't be. I'm here alone. So I walked over and I picked up the phone. On the other end of the line came a blurry static with random silent spaces. This went on for about a minute or two, until I started to hear what sounded like a voice. And this voice was screaming. Screaming like its body was in extreme pain. Deathly screams, full of hatred, that made me feel cold all over. These screams were only partially clear, very faint behind the static. I couldn't make out any words. There may not have been any, just screaming. At this point I started to freak out, tapping the phone off and on, but still the noises didn't change. For a few minutes I paced back and forth, not knowing exactly what to make of it all, or what I could do to calm myself. I thought of ringing Mum, but the phone wasn't working and I didn't dare listen to those noises again. So as the minutes turned to what felt like hours, I finally gathered enough courage to walk down the hallway and into my mum's room where I'd last seen the other phone. But to my shock, it wasn't there. Now losing the plot entirely, I turned my head to the front of the house, and there, lying on its side, was the phone I had used to call Mum not 15 minutes before. I did a mad bolt down to put the phone back on its hook, then ran into the living room to call my friend's house across the street. During the next few days, police were checking every entranceway into our home for any evidence of a break-in. They even checked the chimney. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, and nothing was found. Thankfully, not every paranormal telephone event has a malevolent undercurrent like the last story. Sometimes they just want to say hello. It must have been September or October in 1989. I was 10 years old. I was at home with my father and one of my friends was over. My mother was at work at our local hospital. My father was downstairs and my friend and I were upstairs playing. The telephone rang. I answered the phone upstairs, and an elderly lady with a very quiet voice asked for my father by name. I just presumed she knew my father. I called him, and he answered the phone downstairs, and I replaced the receiver. I went back to my room to play. About 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. My father asked me to answer the upstairs phone while he answered downstairs. We could both now hear the conversation. It was the same lady. She addressed my father by his name again and told him he knew who she was and not to worry, that everything will be fine. My father said he had no idea who she was and told her not to phone again. Later, we went to pick my mother up from work. My father told her about the strange phone call and said it sounded like his grandmother. We arrived home and went into the house. As we walked in, a photo of my mother, father, and myself was standing upright in the middle of the floor. My parents tried to tell me it was done by them as a joke, but I could tell by their faces they were just as scared as I was. Communication with spirits using mechanical means has been claimed by many people throughout history. Table knocking and the Ouija board come to mind. In modern times, these claims continue. The dead have been reported to speak with us through radios, telephones, televisions, and not surprisingly, computers. When I was a freshman in high school, I remember being told by a group of friends that one of the local elementary schools was haunted, and that they all had personally experienced it. One of said friends' mother worked at the haunted school and allowed her kid and a few select friends to come with her one evening. After the first time, it seemed like she, the mother, I'll just call her Mum from now on, would regularly bring her kid and friends into the haunted school to play amateur paranormal investigator. I personally think she just liked to see her kids creep themselves out at night. I'm not really sure, because by the time I heard the school was haunted, this particular group of friends had already made multiple visits to the school. Hearing this, I was intrigued and begged to be taken with on the next visit. I wasn't particularly spiritual or skeptical at the time. I just wanted to experience the thrill of the paranormal. This elementary school had been there since the founding of the town I lived in, and although it had obviously been renovated, chances were good that it could at least be spooky. On the way, I remember being told tales of their past visits, seeing shapes in the hallways, inexplicably bouncing balls, scratches in the ceiling, banging lockers, stuff that sounded like it was ripped straight from the script of a B horror. All of that sounded cool, if not a little bit cliché, but the story about the ghost girl in the computer was the one thing that really intrigued me. My friends claimed that one of the ghosts in the school had access to AIM, the AOL Instant Messenger. They said her name was Annabelle. I remember taking this at face value so as not to dampen the enthusiasm. I wish I had been more insistent about them explaining how they first made contact, but likely didn't want to push it too hard at the time. So we get to the school and are told by Mum not to leave the computer lab. Supposedly the lab was the only part of the school that was lit 24/7, and that hauntings tended not to happen in the lab. But I think her real concern was being able to easily monitor us. She was a teacher at the school and brought some papers to grade while we were free to poke around the computer lab and generally roam the rooms branching off of it. The lab itself opened up into a very long hallway, which itself led to the gymnasium. I was told that being limited to the computer lab wasn't a big deal, because there were a number of strange things you could hear and see coming from the hallway or the gymnasium. Within the next hour or so, I had thought I heard all sorts of things, like scratching the ceiling, lockers rattling, and some doors banging, but it's more than likely that I just thought I was hearing them. After a while, we were all terrified to hear this piercing cackle booming out of the gymnasium. I remember not knowing if it was a ghost or a prank, but regardless, I had no intention of egging on whatever caused the cackle to occur. It was extremely loud and very unsettling. Shaken up, we all retreated to the computer lab to see if Annabelle, the ghost girl, was online, and surely enough, she was. This being about 10 years ago, I can't remember the bits of the conversation like hello and how are you, But eventually we started to ask the ghost whether or not she could prove that she was a real ghost. The first thing we did was ask her how many people were in the computer lab. She answered correctly, 4 boys and 1 woman. We then asked her to say the colour of the shirts we were in. She answered that question correctly as well, providing answers as detailed as, the boy with the long hair is wearing black. At this point we were spooked, but also exhilarated. Thinking that this might be a janitor playing a prank on us with cameras, we decided to ask questions that were either more difficult or dealt with something you couldn't see with a camera. We took off all of our shirts and swapped them with each other, asking her to say who was wearing what shirt now. She answered it perfectly again, with things like, the boy with the blonde hair previously wearing black is now wearing blue. We took small candies from a desk in the computer lab, each a different colour and flavour. We stuck out our tongues and asked her to tell the colours of the candies and the colours of the shirts. She got that right too. There is a boy with a green candy and a black shirt. At this point I was convinced that the school was either employing the world's creepiest but also funniest janitor, or it was a full-blown haunting. After this, I was, to say the least, obsessed with Annabelle. Immediately when I got home, I added her to my friends list on AIM. The first time I saw her on, I introduced myself as someone from the previous night. Just like before, I don't entirely remember the exact details of how I introduced myself to her. All I know is that I was immediately captivated. Certain things immediately stuck out as being a little weird. Her responses would appear almost immediately in multiple full sentences, and she would use impeccable grammar. She seemed to be fluent in several languages, and would often cite giant quotes from old literature that I had never read or even heard of. I vividly remember every time before we would end a conversation, she would have an excerpt of literature or poetry that was always shockingly relevant to our conversation. As convincing and spooky as these characteristics may be, they themselves don't prove that she was a ghost or anything of the sort, but that didn't stop it from both freaking me out and exciting me. Whoever she was, I had never met anybody as interesting. One thing that slightly dampened the thrill was that it seemed that when I was at home she had no ability to see or hear me. According to her, she only had this ability when someone was inside the school. At this point, I had half convinced myself that the weirdness that occurred in the school and all of her strange quirks had to be some part of an elaborate plan. Having no ability to do ghostly things outside of a controlled environment was, to me, evidence that the whole thing was bogus. In spite of it all, I'd still talk to her because, well, this was some weird stuff. When I first started talking to her, she was online pretty frequently. She would usually log on later at night, and we would talk about very simple things. Over a few months of intermittent contact, we came to be very good friends. I didn't want to push asking anything that was personal, purely out of paranoid fear, but she opened up to me over a period of time and told me things that I felt were personal, even how she died in a horseback riding accident as a girl. And when she woke up, she was in her school, the same one, albeit renovated, that stands today. She is bound there, unable to leave. I do remember pressing about why she can't leave the school, but she didn't know. She just told me she died in a horseback riding accident as a girl, and when she woke up, she was in her school. I wish I had saved my conversations, because citing them directly would add to the credibility of my story, but she was very open about the details of her death. The only thing she didn't like to talk about were the other things that inhabited the school. She claimed to be different to them, and she had strongly disliked who she shared the space with. As a result, she told me she spent most of her time in isolation reading books. This was hard to take seriously, as I imagined a floating book with the pages turning every minute. But it would explain why she seemed so well read. I could go on for ages about the content of our conversations, but that's boring and sappy, and not what you came here for. What I really want to share was the night that eliminated 99% of any doubt that Annabelle was truly a ghost. I was at a buddy Kyle's house for a sleepover and wanted to use his computer to use AIM. Kyle was a close friend and was aware that I had supposedly been chatting with a ghost online. I didn't necessarily go online with the sole intent of chatting with Annabelle, but I was hoping that I could spook out my friend just a little bit. Within seconds of me signing on to AIM, Annabelle signs in and urgently messages something along the lines of, "I can see you." She was usually extremely polite, professional sounding for a lack of a better word, so to see her send me this excited message so abruptly kinda freaked me out, just like the night when she was listing off details like hair colour and shirts and whatnot. She mentioned she could see someone whose description fit me exactly. Not only that, but she recognised another boy in the room, one whose description fit my friend exactly. When I asked her how she could see me, she could only say that she felt close to me. Kyle seemed to be much more creeped out than I was, and when I asked him why, he said something like, "Dude, I live like 5 blocks from that elementary school." After that, I immediately realised why Annabelle could see me today, but never at my own house. It seems that my proximity to the school affected her ability to sense me. It's also very curious that she logged on so soon after me, as if she were waiting to let me know that she can see me. It makes me wonder if she knew I was close from the minute I arrived at his house. This really upset my friend, but I only ever felt happy and secure knowing she could see me. Either way, this proved to me that there was almost no way that Annabelle was a creepy janitor messing with kids. It's also important to mention that she couldn't have been my other friends playing a prank on me, as Kyle was in a totally different clique of friends, and they would have no idea I was at his house. This more or less sums up the experiences that I wanted to share with you all. I don't talk to Annabelle anymore, nor have I spoken to her since the year we started talking. The more we talked, the closer we became, and one day she told me she decided it's best if she stops logging on. If Annabelle was an extremely elaborate prank, I'm sure the person behind it all didn't want to go on forever. But if Annabelle was real, I can only make assumptions about why she reached out to people through the computer. It's an interesting idea, communication with the dead through cyberspace. To most of us, cyberspace is just an abstract world of code and massive networks which expresses itself on our computer screens. But might it be possible that the abstract world of cyberspace somehow acts as a window to the afterlife?